The fantasy playoffs are here, and if you want to stay alive in advance, you need to be starting the right running back. So in this video, we're going to be breaking down the 7 running backs who might not seem obvious, but need to be in your lineups for week 15. And let's start in the Carolina Panthers backfield, where you have Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dotto, both coming out of their bye weeks, and both of them in week 13, the last time that we saw them, had difficult matchups, but found success. We could start with Chuba Hubbard, who kind of broke out in this game after not being involved in the offense all that much recently. He had 17 carries, 83 yards. He found the end zone. He also added 2 catches for 41 yards. That's where he had a receiving touchdown. So this was a big game. 120 total yards, a touchdown, nearly 20 opportunities in this game, kind of out of nowhere, because for the past 4 to 6 weeks before that, it was a Rico Dotto show. Now, it's not like Rico Dotto disappeared in this game. He was also seeing about 20 opportunities. He just wasn't as efficient, and it looked like he was playing a little bit banged up, which is perfect timing for a week 14 bye. These guys should be healthy, or at least they should be healthier. But honestly, the way that it's shaping up right now, it's probably both of them are going to be involved moving forward. And when we look at specifically what we can look at this upcoming week, this backfield kind of reminds me of like DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai. Even more recently, Kyren Williams and Blake Corum. Like every other series, you're getting these guys on the field rotating, with Chuba Hubbard having a pretty strong grasp now on the pass catching work. We saw that in the last game. But when you look at this upcoming week, they're both borderline like top 24 options that you need to be starting. So not only Rico Dotto, but Chuba Hubbard I also consider must starts, especially when you consider the matchup. Because this week they're taking on a New Orleans Saints team that ranks 28th in tackling this season. That's not great. When you look at what they're giving up on the ground, 131 rushing yards per game is right around, it's technically 10th, but it's basically tied for being top 8 in the NFL in terms of allowing rushing yards to opposing running backs and offenses. And when we just look at how this game should set up, let's pull it up here on the DraftKings odds for week 15. If we look at this Panthers-Saints matchup, the setup looks pretty nice in terms of game script for what you're going to get out of Carolina. Carolina has to go on the road, but they're actually 2.5-point favorites. They should be in a neutral to positive game script almost the entire time, coming out of the bye week, an extra week to prepare for this divisional matchup as the Panthers push towards winning their division. I think both of these guys could probably go out there and yet again see 15 plus opportunities in a good spot. That's hard to ignore. And let's not forget, this offense wants to run the ball. I get it. Bryce Young has looked good 2 out of his last 3 starts. Tetairoa McMillan could be the offensive rookie of the year if he has a nice end of the season. But despite all the offensive line injuries, they want to run the ball. Check this out. The Panthers rank top 10 in both carries per game and rushing yards per game this season. Even though as a team, they've only scored 7 rushing touchdowns, that could regress as the season comes to a close, which would only help both of the guys in this backfield. So I think both of these guys are starters this week. I would consider them both must starts. I have Rico Dotto ranked higher, but Chuba Hubbard is well within reason to being an RB2 or a flex option depending on your lineup. Now, another guy I want to talk about is Tyrone Tracy, another running back who's coming out of his bye week in week 14. Now, the last time we saw him in prime time in week 13, in his first game back that he got his quarterback back, Jackson Dart, on that, I believe, Sunday night game against the Patriots, he hurt his hip. Actually, it was Monday night. He ends up injuring his hip. Since then, he's been on the practice report with not only that hip injury, but a neck injury. As of this recording, it's Wednesday. We haven't gotten the Giants practice reports just yet, but we'll see if Tyrone Tracy is even a limited participant. That's good news for his week 15 availability. And right before he got injured in week 13, I mean, this guy was on his way to a pretty serious breakout the couple of weeks before that, because in week 11, he posted 88 rushing yards. He also added 51 receiving yards, so 130 total yards against the Green Bay Packers. The week after that in week 12, 62 rushing yards. Oh, he didn't stop there. He added 68 receiving yards. Once again, 130 yards for back-to-back weeks. He was giving you about 16 fantasy points per week during that time. He was giving you like 20 opportunities per game on the ground. He looked like a clear playmaker in this offense, maybe the best playmaker in this offense in terms of the versatility that he was giving the Giants. And despite Devin Singletary remaining involved primarily and specifically in the red zone, you still saw Tyrone Tracy 71% of the snaps the last 2 times he was out there on average. So this was a really good spot. And now you're going to get a dream matchup heading into week 15, because Tyrone Tracy's taking on the Commanders, who have the 29th overall defense when you take into account total defense this year. According to PFF, they have a bottom 10 run defense, and on the season they currently allow the 4th most rushing yards per game, 136 rushing yards per game, 13 touchdowns allowed this year. On average, every carry that an opposing team, a quarterback, a running back, a wide receiver, gets against this defense, they're averaging 4.7 yards per carry. That is bottom 5 in the NFL. Great matchup for these Giants running backs if it's going to be Singletary if Tracy misses, but if Tracy is active, he becomes a must start. And what gets even better is that the Giants are at home. They come out of their bye week and they're 2.5-point favorites. It's not often this year that the Giants are going to come into any games as favorites. The Commanders aren't going to have Jaden Daniels. They go back to Marcus Mariota. Their defense is pretty atrocious. They're probably not going to be able to put up a ton of points in this one. So worst case scenario, it stays close, which means Tyrone Tracy can contribute as both a pass catcher, as he has been doing lately, but also a runner. Now, if Tracy was to miss and you start to get the practice reports that, okay, he's not practicing on Wednesday or Thursday or something like that, and they're going to say Devin Singletary is suiting up, well, Singletary then quickly becomes a must start for me. Kind of track these injury reports reports as the week goes on, but as of right now, I'm going to be assuming Tyron Tracy is back since he had that bye week to get a little bit healthier. I just checked my phone. There's no updates as of 1 p.m. On Wednesday for the practice report. So Tracy looks like somebody I want to be starting, assuming he's active. Now, I also want to be starting TreVeyon Henderson pretty easily. I know a lot of people have been a little bit concerned with Rhamondre Stevenson coming back, but we've seen Henderson regain this backfield even with Stevenson back. And really, since week 10, once Stevenson went down originally, Henderson has been one of the best backs in football. He's actually the RB4 in fantasy points per game during that stretch. And since week 10, he's averaging 17.5 fantasy points per game on 15.2 carries, and he has 5 total touchdowns during that time, 80 rushing yards per game. He's looked good. Now, if we were to look at his game logs on Player Profiler, obviously what is separating him over his last 4 to 5 games or so, right here when he starts to play 77% of the snaps instead of 22%, is that Rhamondre Stevenson injury. But during that time, you're also getting his passing game involvement much higher. These are the targets column right here. You're getting 6, 1, 5, 4, and 4. And what he's doing there is having at least 3 receptions in 4 out of his last 5 games for an explosive player like TreVeyon Henderson, who profiled out coming out of college, kind of like your Jahmyr Gibbs explosive type player, a younger Alvin Kamara or Kamara when he was earlier on in his career. This is a guy, if you're going to give him 3 or 4 catches in open space a game, he's going to make some explosive plays. And now this week he's going to come in. Originally he was a 1-point underdog. Now he's going to be a 1.5-point favorite at home against the Buffalo Bills, which is a great matchup if you're not paying attention this year. The Bills don't have a good run defense. 27th overall in run defense according to PFF, and they're currently allowing the 5th most rushing yards per game, 135.2 per game. 19 rushing touchdowns is the most in the NFL. This is a bottom 3 team against opposing running backs in backfields, which means a really good matchup for TreVeyon Henderson, even with Rhamondre Stevenson back and healthy. Now, before we get into the next player, let me just ask you something. Can you relate to this? Like every Sunday in one of your group chats, somebody says, I knew that guy was going to go off. Well, why don't you prove it? Because now you can. I've teamed up with DraftKings Pick 6, and this is exactly where you could put your football knowledge to the test to actually cash out. All right, now here's how it works. All you have to do is pick more or less on player stats, whether it's passing yards, touchdowns, receptions, and when your calls are right, you cash out. It's pretty simple. There's no complicated rules. You have to combine at least 2 or more player stats together on DraftKings Pick 6, and then you just watch your players perform. Okay, now this next part is pretty huge, so make sure you pay attention. Because new DraftKings customers, when you play $5 or more, you get $50 in Pick 6 credit. So simply put, you play at least $5 if you're a new customer to DraftKings, and there'll be an extra $50 in credits in your Pick 6 account. Pretty cool. So to get in on the action, make sure you download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now using my promo code SAL. Ride the upside and let your picks do the talking for you. In partnership with DraftKings Pick 6, the crown is yours. All right, next up, let's talk about Travis Etienne, who in my opinion should be a slam dunk top 12 running back this week, but I'm still getting a lot of questions about him, and it still makes sense. I understand, like Travis Etienne, if you have good wide receivers on your team, maybe you drafted in the first round like a Christian McCaffrey, you might actually have to have a difficult decision for Travis Etienne in your flex spot or RB2. But it's hard to say that he shouldn't be in there, especially how this team overall is playing right now. The last time we saw Etienne this past week, commanding 20 carries in a game where Baishal Tutin got a concussion, and he came back and had a fumble, and now he's dealing with a concussion. In this game, he also added a reception as well, so you're getting 21 opportunities. He found the end zone. He scored over 20 fantasy points and a comfortable win. He had multiple rushing touchdowns, and this is exactly the type of usage you want to see ramping up as we approach the fantasy playoffs this week, and Baishal Tutin might be limited, dealing with that head injury. We'll have to see as the practice reports in the window goes this week for the concussion protocol. Now, in week 14, you saw Etienne, since Tutin was banged up with the head injury, played 21% of the snaps, 74% of the rush attempts, and then once Tutin fumbled, he just wasn't involved anymore at all. LaQuint Allen, another rookie, played 25% of the snaps. They didn't trust him to have any of the carries, just 0% of the backfield carries, which means that this past week, a very commanding and elite 84% of the backfield carries for Etienne. He wasn't overly efficient, but he was quality. He hit the end zone twice. I don't see his role changing anytime soon the rest of this fantasy season. And now if we start to look, since the Jaguars week 8 bye week, like usually you see the rookies like a Baishal Tutin, LaQuint Allen get involved more. Not the case. Liam Combs has only doubled down on Travis Etienne. In these 6 games since the bye, Etienne's a top 12 fantasy running back, averaging 16.4 PPR points per game on over 17 carries per game. And when you factor in his receptions, the dude's been seeing 19 opportunities per game. This is a legit workhorse back, one of the 10 best roles in football since week 8, the second half of the season. They've gone all in on the run game of this team, their defense. They're winning more games. They're a playoff team right now, the Jaguars, and Etienne is going to be in favorable game scripts moving forward, which includes this week when he's going to be at home against the New York Jets, in which should be a very good matchup for the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jets last week alone gave up Jalen Wright, the backup running back, once Achane went out, over 100 yards. Achane, basically in a quarter and a half of play, had 92 rushing yards and 100 total yards in that game as well. This Jets defense is not good. Obviously, they traded away Quinnen Williams. They traded away Sauce Gardner. Their entire defense was already bad before the trade deadline, and then they lose probably their 2 best players on defense, or 2 of their best. The Jets on the season ranked 26th in tackling, and since the trade deadline, they are a bottom 3 run defense. On the year, They were allowing the third most rushing yards per game now, 139.5 per game. 17 rushing touchdowns is the second most in the league. This is a fantastic spot. 12.5 point favorites. You see that right here, the spread according to DraftKings, 12.5 point favorites for the Jacksonville Jaguars. There's a pretty good chance that Travis Etienne sees, like 25 touches. That's not likely, but there's a chance that it happens when you're going to be a 2-touchdown favorite at home in a good matchup. The next guy we got to talk about is Tony Pollard, who is coming off of a monster week 14 game. I'm talking about the best performance on the week. 25 carries, 161 yards, multiple rushing touchdowns, 28.1 fantasy points, and a tough matchup against the Browns defense, or at least it looked like it would be a tough matchup. But let's be real here. Just this one game is not going to change the fact that his previous 12 games on the season, he didn't look good. He's not back. It was nice if you started him last week, but you should not be starting him moving forward. I know he's in this video, but he's in it because I'm getting so many questions about Tony Pollard, justifiably based on last week, but I would consider him still this week a sit. Because let's be honest, look, I get it. The guy popped off. He had 161 yards total this past week. I get that, but let's just look at the weeks before that. 63 total yards, 5 fantasy points. 41, 8 fantasy points. 26, 5 fantasy points, right? 68, 53, 61. He's not scoring touchdowns in any of these games. He basically went almost 10 weeks without scoring a touchdown before he scored 2 this past week. This is not a guy who, off of 1 week of recency bias, that you could just feel good about putting back into your lineup unless you really need to be starting him for injury reasons or whatever it might be. This is a perfect summation of what I'm trying to talk about. On the left side here on the road of his game split tool, the first 12 games of the season, Tony Pollard was averaging 48 rushing yards per game, not even 10 fantasy points per game, 9.5 fantasy points per game. He was a bench player. He was a borderline waiver wire player. You can see right here in his one game since then, this last week, 28 fantasy points, 161 rushing yards. Obviously the outlier. I know all of you know it was an outlier performance, but in terms of moving forward, just want you to know that this is not his baseline, and the matchup this week is also not great because the Titans are 12.5 point road underdogs against the 49ers. Now the 49ers defense is banged up. All their best players are injured this year. Fred Warner at linebacker, that's a big downgrade, right? Overall, I get it. It's not a good 49ers defense or one that it used to be, but the Titans are not a good offense. They're 12.5 point underdogs for a reason here. 12.5 point underdogs. Tony Pollard, if this team is going to be trailing by multiple scores, that sets up for maybe Tajay Spears, the more pass catching, younger, explosive running back, coming on the field more. So outside of the big performance last week, sure, that was nice, but moving forward, I don't think we could expect it, especially in this matchup. If it was a great matchup this week against the Washington Commanders and it was a closer spread or something like that, sure, maybe you can get by with Tony Pollard in the flex again. I think there's a chance that he only ends up going out there this week instead of seeing 25 carries like last week. He might only end up seeing 10 carries, not have efficiency on them either. Not a great situation. All right, let's get back to the players that you can start, and we'll go back to a Houston Texans rookie who seems like he's always in this video in Woody Marks, and for back-to-back weeks now, he's seen a career high because he's a rookie, so also a season high in carries. 2 weeks ago, it was 19. This past week against the Chiefs in a very big game, 26 carries in a game where Nick Chubb got hurt. He only had 1 carry. Now, Woody Marks wasn't efficient, 2.6 yards per carry, but they kept going back to him behind this bad offensive line. He also added in 2 catches, 8 yards, and a receiving touchdown in the red zone in that game as well. They trusted Woody Marks in this game to be their entire offense. CJ Stroud was out there. It was a tough matchup. CJ Stroud threw 31 times. Woody Marks had 28 touches. And this boiled down to, with Nick Chubb getting hurt, them not trusting anybody else but the late round rookie, which is very important and speaks volumes. 89% of the snaps is insane. 87% of the backfield carries. All of this is fantastic. And now you look forward at what his schedule is going to be. Honestly, not just this week, at home against the Cardinals, amazing matchup. Rest of the fantasy postseason, he could be a league winner. At home against the Raiders, then he goes on the road against the Chargers. This is his fantasy postseason schedule. It looks really good. But for this week, week 15, let's focus on the matchup at home against the Cardinals, because the Cardinals lately, look at their last 3 weeks. They gave up to Travis Etienne 86 rushing yards, and then also if you factor in his receiving yards of 30 and a touchdown, 115 total yards and a touchdown. That was in week 12. Okay, let's fast forward a week to week 13. In week 13, it was Bucky Irving coming back from injury, having 61 rushing yards. He added in 20 receiving yards. He had a touchdown, so he went out there. He immediately scored in his first game back from injury, about 20 points. Then this past week in week 14, not only is it Kyren Williams averaging 6.5 yards per carry and putting up over 80 total yards, but it's Blake Corum getting 128 yards on the ground, multiple touchdowns, averaging nearly 11 yards per carry. And now you're going to put Woody Marks in this matchup. A really good matchup at home. Big favorite for the Texans. They're probably going to lean on Woody Marks once again, whether or not Nick Chubb is even active. And just to show you exactly how big of favorites that they are, the Texans are 9.5 point home favorites, which typically means you're going to be leading by probably at least a touchdown at some point in the second half, if not the entire second half, or at the very worst, the fourth quarter, meaning Woody Marks should get a couple extra second half carries in this game. So track the injury reports on Nick Chubb. If Chubb was to suit up, maybe it takes away the opportunity for Woody Marks to see a ceiling game of like 25 opportunities again. Either way, though, I think he's coming out of this game with 15 touches or more. All right, next up, let's stick with the rookie theme here and talk about a 6th round rookie running back, Devin Neal, who's been filling in for the Saints, and Alvin Kamara, specifically, who's been out the last 2 games. And we just got a nice game in his 2nd week. Now, he's seen good volume the past 2 weeks, but this last week, he got 19 carries, 70 rushing yards for Devin Neal. He ends up adding in a reception for 14 yards as well. So you're getting 20 touches out of him for 84 yards. Now, his quarterback, Tyler Suck, took 2 touchdowns away from him on the ground. I believe both of them were in the red zone, so that's not going to happen every single week. But Devin Neal has looked good out there. Even though Shuck had 2 touchdowns last week, Devin Neal also found the end zone. He put up a respectable 17 fantasy point day. And now we're going to see if Alvin Kamara, who's missed the past 2 weeks, can return this week, but it is still a big if. He has not been practicing lately, and basically this backfield has all been Devin Neal. 71% of the snaps this past week, 66% of the rush attempts, and a very impressive 71% of the routes run. Even though he is a bigger back at Kansas, he showed he can catch the ball. And there are other backs getting snaps. Evan Hall had 13% of the snaps. Audric Estime, the former Denver Bronco, had 16% of the snaps, but they're not trusting either of those guys in a pass catching role, in a red zone role. It's all been Devin Neal, the 6th round rookie out of Kansas. And as of right now, based on before the Wednesday practice reports come out, at least earlier in the week, there was reports from Kellen Moore getting asked, is Alvin Kamara going to come back? And he basically just said, we'll see. Alvin Kamara did not practice last week in full at any point, so he's still up in the air if he's going to be available for week 15. If Kamara is indeed out, Devin Neal is once again a guy who you can put into your flex spot and be a RB2 for you. The matchup for this week for Devin Neal is also a quality one. You're going to have, we talked about the Panthers guys at the beginning of the show, so on the opposite side of that, Devin Neal will face the Carolina Panthers. Now, they don't have the worst rush defense, but on the season, they have allowed 16 rushing touchdowns, which is currently the 4th most in the NFL. 120 rushing yards per game is around average. So if this game can stay close, which on paper right now it's expected to stay relatively close, the Saints are 2.5 point home underdogs, you probably should see them continue to lean on their run game. Tyler Shuck has looked better as of late, but I don't think they're going to go from making him throw 27 to 28 times per game to 40 times per game, especially if this one stays close. So Devin Neal probably getting 16 more carries, maybe a target or 2, especially if they play from behind at home. And then it comes down to if he scores a touchdown. And as of right now, he's getting all the red zone work in this backfield, assuming Kamara doesn't return. So as of right now, I haven't finalized my week 15 projections and rankings, which you can check out if you want to at jointheblueprint.com and join 10,000 other people or so that have access to those tools the rest of the season and heading into next year. But Devin Neal is going to be somebody for me who is a top 30 running back, and depending on Kamara's status, can push towards the top 24 in what should be a fine matchup. So these are the 7 must-start running backs for week 15 fantasy football. The playoffs are finally here. Now, the wide receiver version of this video will be out a day from now. Maybe it's already out, depending on when you're watching this. It will pop up right here once it's out. Appreciate you all a ton for tuning in advance. Be sure to hit the subscribe button before you go, and I will see you all in the next one.